there was a time where technology could take blue-collar jobs. This is the first ever attack on white-collar jobs. And it seems like it's a fairly deadly one. Right now people are like, okay, I'm just more productive, I'm doing more stuff, I'm editing some stuff here and there. Let's talk about GPT-4 and that's not the only LLM that's going to be out there competing. Maybe there are some of them we don't know that it probably exists in some ways.
Yeah.
What happens, like, just imagine a few scenarios. Let's talk about jobs at Zerodha and jobs at CRED.
It's a very touchy topic. It's a very politically sensitive topic everywhere.
We'll put a disclaimer in the video and start. For everybody who's here and everybody who's going to watch, you can pause and stop if you don't like dark stuff. It's going to get dark. Anyways, I'm going to start. We're going to chat about what's up with the world and the impact of AI. We'll talk about climate change in conjunction of this whole thing, and we'll also make sure that we try to keep it evidence-based, data-based, and not feelings-based, and we'll not challenge each other. All that stuff we'll not do. Okay. Let's start with this thing about what is AI, and when did it start, and why is this different this time?
I think, despite all the technologies that we have, people still cannot agree on like a single definition for AI. There are many different definitions, but the simplest definition is the attempt to recreate human-like intelligence in machines. When did it start? I think if you really look at it, it started many millennia ago. It's not a new phenomenon. It's not 2 or 3 or 10 or 50 years old. Because this is one particular technological feat or attempt that has deep roots in philosophy, and some of the debates right now are extremely philosophical, as they should be. I think you can trace it back to this, to the debates of mind versus body, mind over matter, mind and body being the same, or them being pure material matter, and that's thousands of years ago. And the whole matter versus mind debate raged in ancient India, in different Indian philosophical traditions. It was like a big hot topic in ancient Greece. I think atomicism, the idea that everything arises from minute particles called atoms. That's, I think, you can really trace the roots of artificial intelligence all the way back to this debate. And coming to more practical, relatable terms, this whole idea of automatons, humans building lifelike dolls and with cogwheel mechanisms creating lifelike behavior. There were bots that wrote set script, once wound up in, I think, medieval Europe in 19th century, etc., etc. So these were all, I see all of these as, all of those things as attempts towards trying to imbibe human-like intelligence in machines. So what we have right now, the modern AI attempts, again, that predates our idea of computing and the modern computer science in general. Like we were saying earlier, I think the first attempt to mathematically model a human neuron, to codify it, happened almost more than 100 years ago. French mathematician. And then I think 30-40 years later, the first artificial neurons were created. I remember when I was in university, we played around with some of these concepts. I think McCullough-Pitts neurons, early 40s. And this was before we had the modern computer architecture. And these were physical devices that behaved like neurons, electricity goes in, pulses come out after a threshold. So I think that is the pivotal moment where the modern kind of AI starts, and that is 1940s, before modern computers. So then there were plenty of breakthroughs in the 50s. More neurons, more kinds of neurons were created. Mechanical neurons. Then once we had computation, software neurons made it easier. I think perceptron was one of the first serious attempts that really kickstarted the modern AI research. That was in the 50s. And then plenty of things have happened, and we've arrived at, let's say, transformers, deep learning, etc., etc. In the 80s, there were Hopfield networks, which were the starting point of modern neural nets. So plenty of milestones. But then the point is, this is not new. The breakthroughs are new, but the things that have led to these breakthroughs cannot be looked at in isolation. They are a result of 60, 70, 80 years of actual modern electromechanical computational research. And the philosophy that has backed all of this up is literally thousands of years. Sorry, that's like a quick...
I know. I'm going to pause. Somebody's playing some English song. Needs to stop. Is it you? Is it this TV? It is there.
There's a faint background.
I know, there's a song also. Like, it's a Halo. Somebody's singing that song.
Oh, it's my phone.
What kind of music do you listen to?
Beyonce is amazing. Who doesn't like Beyonce? I like Beyonce.
It was Beyonce. I was like familiar, but...
Strangest thing, right? I've gone on like 3 or 4 floors here, the terrace here, and there was this faint background music. I was like, it must have some mechanism here.
You are the mechanism.
So sorry, okay, flaw in human intelligence. I'm so sorry about that.
That's good.
Can we edit out Beyonce from the reel?
We should keep it. just for some sanity over here. Okay, I'm gonna go straight into what is different this time? Why is this time exponential? We'll not talk about why humans don't get exponentiality. That's understood. We've talked about it many times, that how we don't understand compound interest, forget about exponentiality. So let's just ignore that. Yeah. Our brain cannot process it. Can you talk about why is this time exponential, and can you give some examples?
So when people say there have been breakthroughs, to define a breakthrough you need a baseline. If somebody does something out of the blue in complete isolation, you can't really define it as a breakthrough. So why it's different this time, the quick primer that we did, you really have to consider all of that. Many a millennia worth of thought, a century worth of research, all kinds of artificial intelligence technologies and breakthroughs and research that have happened in the last century, and what's happened now over the last couple of years, or maybe the last 6 months, how it's different. So it's evident if you really look at what has been achieved in the last 60 years with computational artificial intelligence and what's happened in the last 6 months, it's evident from its behavior. So the holy grail was computers understanding, in quotes, human language, and that's one of the biggest pursuits was natural language parsing, entire computational field of study. But now there are these things called LLMs, where you don't have to put in rules of natural language parsing. These things can parse and respond, even reason, or there's an illusion of reason at least, in pretty much all known human languages, pretty much all known computer languages. So it's just kind of absorbed the entire field of NLP. You don't now really have to do natural language parsing algorithms. There's this one thing that does all of that. Then the other thing was, of course, illusion of reason, right? When you ask it something, you should get something meaningful back. That's happening. And forget that, you can have a chain of thought conversation back and forth throughout. So these are all entire fields of artificial intelligence over the last 60 years. Each one of these, kind of behavior. And conversing is just one tiny piece. There are these things called, it's called emergent phenomena. That's the simple term. There are many different kinds of weird behaviors emerging from the same model, like a large language model. Yes, language is the way to interact and communicate with it, but the way there are examples of some of these models attempting to reason, getting into logical arguments, solving logical quandaries. So there's this one thing one class of technology called the LLM that is showing n number of behaviors that has kind of subsumed entire fields of AI research all into, this is one thing, and that is why it's different.
Talk about impact on human jobs for a second. We'll go to humans later on. There was a time where technology could take blue-collar jobs. This is the first ever attack on white-collar jobs, and it seems like it's a fairly deadly one. Right now people are like, okay, I'm just more productive, I'm doing more stuff, I'm editing some stuff here and there. Let's talk about GPT-4 plus and that's not the only LLM that's going to be out there competing. Maybe there are some of them we don't know that it probably exists in some ways.
Yeah.
What happens, like, just imagine a few scenarios. Let's talk about jobs at Zerodha and jobs at CRED.
So it's a very touchy topic. It's a very politically sensitive topic everywhere.
We'll put a disclaimer in the video and start.
It's okay to talk about it, but it's a very touchy topic. And if we say that, when you say this class of technology will cause widespread job losses, that's a blanket statement. And it may be true, it may not be true, but I think we have to, it's better to look at it step by step so that people who do not see the risk also see the risk. I think it should be a series of Sherlockian logical deductions. We can work with simple examples. So the entire point of the crux of the matter of an LLM is language, and it has already consumed large amounts of text and knowledge. You can feed it large amounts of text, and you can ask it pertinent questions in your language, Japanese, Hindi, English, doesn't matter, it's one technology. And then it can quickly sift through the semantics, the meaning of the, let's say, 50 pages worth of text that you put in and give you pointed answers. Now that is a job typically a researcher would do. You would give someone a 50-page legal document and say, you know what, I want to know these, what are the pertinent points? They'll spend half a day, 1 day, 2 days, whatever, they'll do their research and come back with a summary. Now there's this thing where you can feed it huge amounts of text and suddenly get summaries. Can't guarantee that it's right. You also can't guarantee that humans are right. But that is just, that's one entire class of jobs. It cuts across industries. At CRED, there'll be people who consume information to produce intelligence. At Zerodha, there are people who consume information, textual information to produce intelligence. Every company, every industry has this role. And so logically, if there's a system that can do all of this within seconds, and it's, let's say, even 95% great, logically, how does that affect the human jobs that were doing this? And this class of jobs alone is probably millions of people across the world.
Yeah.
So simple logical deduction, and that's just one thing.
This is already possible.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what will be possible. We'll try to hint at AGI or the path to AGI. What starts happening?
So what is all? I think we have to really look at the entire idea of nth order effects. This is a simple first order effect. You text in, intelligence out, and so imagine. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. It's just a thought experiment. Imagine 10 people, researchers who are doing this. Suddenly you have this one model, an AI model that now produces intelligence. Where does that intelligence typically go? In a, let's say, for-profit organization, that intelligence will be used to make certain decisions, conditions. And that decision, if you think of it from a first principles perspective, let's say you got 5 bullet point key points from a 50-page document. The next step would be to read those 5 bullet points and take an action, send an email or click a button on a CRM, whatever. So what would be the next logical step? Bring another system in that takes this intelligence and executes a small little action. In the beginning, it would be low risk actions, but if that starts working, what would be the next logical advancement? Slightly higher risk actions. So rather than trying to envision all kinds of things this can do, I think which is impossible to predict nth order effects. It's easier to do first principles dissection from just this one thing of text summarization. It has the potential to move on to decision making. And once you get to decision making, that's a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
from low risk decisions in an organization to, I mean, if that starts working, the risk is slowly upped until systems, automated black boxes start making decisions. So if there are systems that can do decision making, up to, there could always be a human that finally says yes or no, then you can imagine the impact on every single human organization where, I mean, everybody runs on decision making.
It's interesting. So I'll talk about a story which is like a nice precursor to what can be the type of job. So one of the most highly paid job in the US is of a radiologist.
Yeah.
Which reads X-rays, MRIs, all of that. And once upon a time, when one of my earlier avatars, I tried to build a teleradiology startup, which was basically Indian radiologists who cost marginally, like 1/100th the potential cost of a US radiologist, could do an assistance program and give that for the US radiologist to kind of approve that, okay, this is a good enough detection. And obviously kept the rare cases for the main radiologist to see, because 90% of X-rays, MRIs turn out to have nothing in it. Now, what was interesting is that three things that was shocking. The US radiologists made comment that the Indian radiologists are actually quite good. Like, what is going on? And the simple thing that they came up with, that the Indian radiologists just saw so many MRIs and X-rays because our volume of country is huge and our doctors per capita is low. They are just like really good at their own AI. So they were actually quite good. Second is the cost was dramatically lower. The third thing that was interesting is that they were actually doing much better on the rarer cases and the misses. So some of the reverse thing happened. They said, why don't you audit my last 500 readings and see if I have missed anything? And the Indian radiologists actually did a better job of detecting the past thing. Now, obviously that startup did not go where there were regulatory challenges. I was not sure about the market size. All of that is a separate topic. But now, with AI, I don't know Indian or US radiologists will be able to stand a chance maybe in 5 years from now. By the way, we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. We've spoken about it's impossible to predict what's going to happen in 5 years. But these are not even the category of jobs just stuck on text processing and all of that. This is years of compounding knowledge of becoming a radiologist and going through so many things and being able to diagnose well. If diagnosis goes away, solutions can be playbooks, because basically that's what medical science is in some ways. Obviously the rarer cases will still go, but there is evidence now that rarer cases are being solved by AI at a much higher accuracy. So we are entering some scary times. Now, on that positive note, what's the 10-year view? What should we be doing?
I honestly...
Can I ask a personal question? You've chosen to not have a kid. And it was not an emotional decision, it was a thought through decision, I'm assuming. And you can change that decision if you want, but what was the background of this, and is it correlated to what's going to happen in 10 years?
So it's a very difficult decision, as one can imagine, especially in the Indian context. It took a very long time to arrive at that decision, and of course with the full participation and consent of my partner, but it took probably, almost a decade to arrive at that decision. And the seeds really were planted, I think, in the late 2000s in me. And it's really to do with climate change. So this whole scare that the world is only going to get worse, so it's not ideal to bring a child, it's not right to bring a child to the world, is probably again 5,000 years old, because the world was way more violent and chaotic and disease-ridden, many millennia
and living in the most peaceful time ever.
Exactly. So in absolute terms, you are living in the most peaceful time ever, highest human life expectancy, everything's gotten better. So that's the retort. But if you really pay attention to what's been happening with climate change, the amount of destruction, that's just first order. Nth order effects we don't even know. Over the last maybe 30-40 years, when it really accelerated, I think we are moving to a world, it's not my thought, there is mountains and mountains of evidence out there that we are moving towards a world where many of these unpredictable climatic events could just be catastrophes which will displace a really large number of people, and who will get displaced as always the poorest, the most marginalized, people who subsist on small little wages every day, people who have limited access to water. So we just have to, we've all been reading about heat waves, right? The super erratic heat waves, the ice caps melting, hottest here in the history, everywhere from rural villages in Kerala to parts of North India to the poles. So if you really look at the evidence, we're going to be in a space where there'll be increasingly chaotic, and climate is a feedback loop system, like what was happening with that mic and speaker earlier, right? It's a feedback loop. It accelerates. So we are going to enter an era. We've already entered an era where these unpredictable events, erratic monsoons, erratic summers, erratic monsoons. Imagine the nth order effects. It affects huge amounts of flora and fauna. It affects our food security, all kinds of things, and that's just rain.
Or water for that matter.
Yeah. And there are questions about water conflicts. There are we are starting to see,
emerge.
signals are emerging. There are island nations trying to move themselves. These are all simple examples. But the nth order effects of such a complex climatic system which has emerged over billions of years, which we managed to mess up with our industrial revolution and technological progress in the last 100 years, is going to be really nasty. So it was entirely based on evidence, and it just seemed logical that it's illogical to bring yet another child to this world where there'll be a large number of marginalized children suffering, and we're all privileged. Everybody sitting here is privileged, and we'll figure out. We'll buy ACs. We'll do whatever.
We'll do something.
Yeah,
get out of the situation.
Yeah, the 0.1% will always figure something out, but it just seemed wrong. So, and that's just climate change. There's this whole big litigation happening in the US. I think Forever Chemicals. I don't want to name this large corporation, but they've emitted lakhs of different kinds of so-called forever chemicals over the last many decades, all over the place, which permanently cause damage, and the forever because they don't undergo reactions and dissipate.
Wow.
And they're being sued. But this whole thing about suing, what does it even mean in the grand scheme of Earth's history? We are here in a fleeting moment, and a bunch of humans are bickering. So that's been my reasoning.
On that particular topic, let's just move back to thinking about AI right now. You talked about that 0.1% privilege, right? And we've always been talking about world has disparity of wealth, but it always existed. Humans never had this concept of it's almost like physics. It's always going to be true. So while we increased the base poverty limits and we got more people to kind of be okay, the disparities only increased because the total amount of wealth in the world had dramatically and exponentially grown since Industrial Revolution, right? AI, I feel, is going to be making that. You remember that chart how the GDP of the world has gone like this?
Yeah.
I think it's going to go to levels we cannot imagine now, right? And at a much faster acceleration rate, which means the disparity of what we have felt so far is going to look like a joke now, because the richest set of 500 human beings are going to be at a different order of magnitude of wealth and power, right? Now the question is that if this is going to happen, and we always had this conflict of disparity and all of that, what happens to the concept of nations? What happens to the concept of conflicts? How do poor nations survive? How do rich nations benefit? How do you see this evolve?
Any answer to that is going to be extremely dark. But again, we can play that Sherlockian game of logical reasoning and deduction. When we speak of nations and borders and GDP, these are all brand new concepts, just a few decades really.
Yes.
And before that, there was no codification of GDP.
Yes.
And the geographical maps looked completely, absolutely different.
Yeah.
So I think it's even meaningless to talk about these concepts that have lasted barely a century.
Yes.
And if you look back and peek back in history, maybe even 3,000 years ago, if you pick, let's say, Carthage, that civilization that, I don't know, for some reason the entire world has forgotten, but Carthage lasted, I don't know, 700, 800 years, and it was one of the most powerful civilizations on the planet. And within that civilization, there were periods, mini eons of dictatorships, aristocracy, republic, democracy. Same thing in ancient Greece, same thing in ancient India. All kinds of kingdoms have gone through all kinds of cycles.
Yeah.
So when we speak of today's world, geography, etc., we are ignoring 3 to 5,000 years worth of recorded history, and these things having been played out countless times. In ancient Greece, there was a period where you had 50 years of democracy, 50 years of republic, suddenly became a dictatorship, and suddenly something else. When we peek back, it's just a distant blur.
Yeah.
But our present right now, it's only just a few decades, right? So how can we even? It's meaningless. It's meaningless to project these what could be temporary things. GDP lasted. The idea of GDP was formulated in the 30s, just barely a century, into the future. The concept might disappear 10 years from now. That's how humanity has always.
Concept of money, concept of country,
possible.
all of it.
We could keep redefining. I mean, who knows, right? So it's very delusional of us to root our entire idea of future in the last 60 years. We really have to read history.
Well, that's a very pertinent topic. Most people have not really read history, except what came in their academics, which have been obviously influenced through what the country wanted you to know. If you really go to history and see patterns of it, so you talk about civilizations. There's an interesting study and books and YouTube and documentary for how civilizations end, right?
Oh yeah.
And I've always I between two companies I had come up with Delta 4 as a concept, and it was actually born out of physics and biology on how a species wipes off another species, and basically the key insight is the new version is significantly more efficient at managing energy, which means keeping their entropy, local entropy low and overall increase entropy. For example, air conditions is keeping our local entropy low, right? We are not in rain struggling, and increasing the external entropy by passing on this heat and dissipating it further. Now, if you take this concept further, countries are nothing but these complexities again. Species are these complexities. So we call it the entropic complexities, which is just nothing but storage of energies going from one structure to another structure. So the study which is all studies point to one thing, that civilizations are nothing but a store of energy, which dissipates into the next store of energy basis their ability to be more efficient at doing things, right? And therefore we are going through this interesting transitionary thing where the ability to create Delta 4 is now a lot more easier than what it took, the amount of energy it required. So therefore, a lot of people make this joke about, can you make, actually I'm going to ask you that question. Can you make an LLM for, I'm going to give you $100 million. Can you do that?
So that reminds me of this very famous quote from Carl Sagan. So in his, I think one of the episodes of Cosmos, he said, to make an apple pie, you must first create the universe from scratch. And that is a legendary, absolutely mind-blowing quote. What that really means is that nothing really exists in isolation. So like we discussed earlier, today's AI, the transformer breakthrough of the 2017 or the LLM GPT breakthroughs of the last 2 years, etc., couldn't have spontaneously emerged. You've had to have the entire civilizational progress, etc., that have led to that moment, including actual work, research, etc. So if you ask me, can I'm not an expert in LLMs or GPTs, but if you ask me, there's this X amount of money, can you create this really complex piece of technology out of nothing? The answer is no. So how can one create something like that out of thin air? You can't create it out of thin air. OpenAI used the research that came out of Google Brain Project to build this. Now, if Google hadn't published that paper, we most likely wouldn't have had these breakthroughs. We wouldn't be chatting about this. So that the thought that you can create something extraordinarily complex out of isolation, like one person or 10 people, is largely delusional, I would say. If there are people out there who think that I can, put X amounts of money here, let an LLM emerge, it won't. So it worked out for OpenAI because they had the right environment where, like we discussed again, there were decades worth of research, people, culture, DNA, access to material, access to technology, access to money. It's a series of events that have led to why was OpenAI founded? Even that is it's an event in the series. So sometimes it's possible to create things out of nothing. Like wartime, humanity changes. When there's, let's say, threat of war, people suspend their entire lives, come together, build extraordinary things. But that is that's an exceptionally rare event. That's not the norm. So in peacetime, if you say, I'll give you X, build Y, the likelihood is really, 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 really low.
I'm going to switch back to a personal situation now. 10 years we have. Should we be doing all this like job, building companies, or like be chilling? Because I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. What's your recommendation on this? I genuinely think about this.
The show must go on, right? And that's how...
It's like the Titanic guys who like playing...
A great historical fact. But really, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you think about it, forget AI, the threat of climatic doom, planetary catastrophe hasn't caused us to pause and for people to collectively try and save the planet. I mean, AI is cool, right?
We're still thinking it's cool right now.
Yeah, I mean, there are cool products coming out, right? So if the threat of planetary collapse hasn't united humans...
It's a good point. I don't know what will unite.
No, we are starting new wars. We are starting large-scale wars right now as we speak.
Yeah. I think what AI can be used for when it comes to military is a different beast altogether. Let's just switch back to India. Let's say we were to really give recommendations. What should India do or Indians do? What would you say what to do?
I find it extremely difficult to answer questions where we sum up India, such a complex civilization, 1.4 billion people into anything you say, you're probably trying to project yourself as a representative of the entire concept, nation, idea of India. It's very difficult. I don't know what is right or wrong. India is not one homogeneous entity. It's one of the most complex countries in the world.
Yeah.
How could you possibly have this one recommendation that takes into account all these complexities in such a non-homogeneous society? I have no idea. But we can try and experiment. We should tinker. That's
what are you going to do for 10 years? What's your plan? There is pre-AI and there is post-AI. What are you doing post-AI? What has changed in your life, in your choices, in your decisions, in your long-range planning?
I don't have long-term plans. Not in a nihilistic sense where I don't care and I'll do whatever. That's not how it works. But I find it impossible to peek into, let's say, 2 years from now, let alone 10 years from now. I mean, I don't even know what I'll be doing next week. How could you project what a billion people will be doing 10 years from now? I don't do that. So I try to do whatever's in my control. There are certain things that are in my control, what I choose to say, do, the projects that I choose to execute, So my choices are largely limited to that, what I can do. So I'm involved in way too many projects. So I pick projects that I think are that produce societal good. It could be a small little technology thing, could be some of the work that we're doing via our foundations, could be any of those. So I'll continue doing that. And
it doesn't bother you that you can barely make an impact to the scale of problem you're dealing with?
It bothers me. That's the exact existential crisis, right? Once you realize that, or maybe once you accept that, no matter what you do, perhaps nothing will change, then you go into that trap of defeatism, and but that's a very dangerous trap. But that is what it is to be human, right? Despite knowing that it might not make a material difference, we'll still try, and you don't know what is going to compound and come out of all of this. So, like I said, we can only really worry about what's in our control. So, I try to only worry about my actions, and the outcomes are entirely random. I have an absurdist worldview. A lot of things that have happened in my life in the, let's say, last decade have been complete coincidences. How I met Nitin, for example, is a complete coincidence. We happen to be on opposite sides of the road, all of that.
Oh, is that true? Is that what happened?
Yeah.
I don't know what the story. What happened? How did you meet?
So it's a chain. If you trace that chain of events back, we'll go back to the single cellular organism. But that is why long-term plans, I think, are absurd. But I'll give you an example. So I was in the university for 6 years. Then I abruptly moved to Bangalore because Bangalore had better internet. This was 2012. And I was here working on my projects, technology stuff, hobby projects and whatnot. And an old school senior reached out, messaged me saying, "Oh, I remember that you used to fiddle with computers in school." And we spoke for the first time after a decade. "Do you still do?" I said, "I still do." He's like, "I have this idea. Can we catch up?" And he happened to be in South Bangalore, and I happened to be in South Bangalore. And I happened to be in South Bangalore because when I wanted to move to Bangalore, I had no concept of the geography here, and my cousin was studying in South Bangalore. So I was like, "Oh, he's there." So I also moved there. So even that is a coincidence, over a phone call. So we met up, we caught up, and this is Abid from Sensible. Sensible is another financial platform. So then he had this idea of building this financial app, and I had no clue of finance back then, possibly even today, not something I'm interested in. And I got interested because it was a great engineering challenge. 2012, there was good stuff coming out, high quality consumer software technology, and I looked at this whole finance landscape and there was nothing happening. And to a programmer, to a software developer, that's a very exciting prospect. Like, "Oh, finance. I'm really excited to do new things. Let's do this." So we started working on this. Then we had to look for financial organizations to partner with. And we were trying to speak to all the marquee names, nobody really bothered. And Abid had another friend who was involved in this, who lived on Bannagatta Road, South Bangalore, and we used to hang out at his place. And Nitin's first office happened to be like 200 meters away from this place. So one day, it just, whatever happened, we walked in, said hi, and that's how it started.
So interesting.
But a string of coincidences.
Yeah. A lot of people say that to build good products, you have to be the user of product. Do you do a lot of trading, buying stocks, mutual funds?
I've never traded in my life. I'm not a trader or an investor. But that's why you have teams. That's why you have collaboration.
I was just curious. I expected this answer, so I was like curious.
But were you CRED curious?
I'll tell you the story of curious. I was thinking about how did I get to this curiosity thing, and I was like thinking about a coincidence, and so I'll tell you my coincidence story. When I was in first standard, my teacher gifted me a book, and because the character in that book looked like me, and the book was about a curious kid, so I just assigned this personality to me because I had to be that person in that book.
Yeah.
Complete coincidence. And I was just thinking about how did this whole thing of being curious happen?
Yeah.
And I was just like, I can't be just like, not that my family has some crazy academic genius in the thing, or not that I have people around me who were like brilliant. What happened? And I was just thinking about this identity that I assigned because of a random gift that my teacher gave me first standard.
That's how humans have always lived their life. That's how big and small events in history have always happened. That one phone call, that one conversation, that one word that you overhear, it completely changes timelines. So, and the butterfly effect, right? That one tiny thing that happened 30 years ago that left an impression on you can completely change your trajectory, and you end up going and affecting a number of people. That changes the course of history. So imagine this happening with 8 billion humans, where there are coincidences shaping. So in such a world, how could you possibly make a 50-year plan or 100-year plan? It's great. It's a great attempt. But I think it's a nice thought exercise.
Okay, on thought exercise, let's do a thought exercise. A large chunk of our market cap is software services companies.
Yeah.
we're not going to discuss what happened to the market cap. We're going to talk about they are currently providing some services. All of us have either relatives, family members, close siblings, all of them are connected to the industry, and we are somehow part of the industry even though we may not be working on these companies.
Yeah.
How are they going to get affected in your view? And this is a thought experiment.
So I think we can have a nuanced take here. There are many different classes of programming or software development or tech jobs. Not all programming jobs are the same. It's a whole gradient. And IT services, the way we understand it, again in the Indian context, it's a certain class of jobs. Actually, before that, I ended up speaking to someone today who said that they spoke to someone else today, and this organization had an opening for 6 developers, and this is a product tech company, I think, and this GPT-4 stuff, whatever Copilot, whatever they're using, apparently turned out to be so good that they've decided to close those roles. They're no longer hiring for those 6, positions, and so this has started happening right around us, in small pockets. So sorry, coming back to IT services. Ironically, I think maybe IT services, the way we are looking at it, may be shielded from this for a little while, because again, first principles thinking. When you outsource large amounts of your technology, it's typically old, ancient, legacy technology, 40-year-old technology.
I've heard people are still doing Fox Pro and stuff.
So these are so complex, these systems are so complex, so old, so badly maintained over, let's say 20, 30, 40 years that people are afraid to touch it. Anything that you change might just, destroy 40 years worth of legacy. So these are not good code bases where you can just add developers to, expand, extend. You're afraid to touch it, and it's business continuity. If you're a 40-year-old system, if you're a large bank, your 40-year-old system breaks, that's done, right? Done for. So maybe this is just because of this incidental reason that it's not easy to integrate new things into these old technologies that we service, the technology services industry services. It's not easy to change parts, it's not easy to plug in, plug out. Maybe for that reason, this may be shielded for a longer period.
I'll challenge you on this. The host companies that you're building this for, they may not be able to survive competition.
Nth order,
So this is the nth order thing. So let's say I am protected I'm protected because I'm in this some jungle which is not connected to a city, so I'm safe from COVID. It seems like that right now. Because I'm in this cool tribal place called as Fox Pro, right? But the one I serve is not disconnected. They're not in some private island. They're competing in big markets. And unless they become more efficient, they're going to die, right? And therefore, my host companies will want to do something wartime to change things. So maybe that changes things.
It's true. I mean, there are so many variables, but there's this whole class of regulated organizations, let's say banks, etc.
Or oil companies who will just still remain relevant because they're going to fuel the AI.
There's that. But I think such disruption will probably not be allowed in heavily regulated industries. So when we speak of large-scale organizations outside India availing tech services from India, many of them are large banks, etc. So regulators will not suddenly allow sudden disruption. I mean, you can't just go disrupt a bank with AI or whatever. That's not how it works, right? So there are so many variables. But assuming that some of these large organizations are protected by regulations for a while,
there is some protection.
Yeah.
Either you are in an ancient technology, or you're protected by some regulator, or by a country. That seems to be like some safe spaces in some ways, right?
Yes, for short periods of time. Because when, on the one hand, you have this legacy system that you can't touch, so that code generation AI is not coming to replace and do whatever, replace people who've been servicing it. But on the other hand, there'll be new things that emerge that are far more cutting edge and sophisticated. So for how long can this entrenchment protect? It's just a matter of time. But I think it'll be protected for a little. It's just a guess. A little while more, the services.
From all that you've seen, how far are we from, let's not know how far are we, let's assume it's going to happen, but like how much chance would you give it to a Marvel quality movie being made completely with AI with no humans involved?
Difficult, but I don't think it's science fiction at this point. Because literally every week there's a new model that is coming out that is upping the ante a little bit. By the week, sometimes every 2 days there is some cutting edge breakthrough happening, right? So just this, just today there was a demo. I read this on Hacker News. I saw it on Hacker News where somebody's figured out, I think, stable diffusion to generate videos, and it's just some hobby somewhere, I think. So I think it's not a lot of time. It's not a lot of time.
We could like have 4 Marvel movies a day. Like that's a good future, right?
So that opens up an entire Pandora's box of other philosophical quandaries. If you have a button that generates the best possible movie that you like every time you press it, I mean, then we are satiated, right? You'll stop caring, because if everything is always perfect and everything's always available at the click of a button, why would you watch?
I disagree. I'll tell you why I would say it's not going to be the case. Because so I read an interesting study. It says that why can kids watch the same cartoon movie 10 times and laugh every time, right? Because the human brain takes some time to detect patterns and predict. So for them, every time it's exciting experience. But we need Christopher Nolan level stuff to be even think about watching it again, because the next time you'll be like, I can't laugh at this, I can't watch this again, I know what happens next, all of that. Now, unpredictability through AI in terms of scenarios, like you can make a Black Mirror episode almost every 10 minutes if you think about the variability it can think about, because second order effects, third and 100 order effects can be such interesting possibilities, right? For example, one of the things that I've done many times in interviews at CRED, I ask somewhat morbid questions, but just to test second order thinking is like, what if everybody who's taken the COVID vaccine in the world dies? What happens to the world in 5 years from now or 1 year from now? Most people can't think because their brain just hijacks into amygdala mode that, oh my god, everybody is dead, I am dead. And they're like, oh, but there'll be like less retail market for this. I was like, but will there be market? Will there be stock? Will there be money? I think people cannot think about all of these things. So I think the variability you can create by putting, like, every movie with a thought experiment can be a great content. So I think maybe we'll have some good content.
We will, but I think I have a slightly different take. So you spoke of unpredictability, but this is predictable unpredictability. I know that every time I press that button, there'll be some unpredictable thing. It's guaranteed. So,
but it's very Pavlovian. I think we'll keep pressing.
But what's it called? Hedonic adaptation. That's a thing.
Yeah.
So we get bored of things. You want that shiny phone in your hand right now. You get it a week later, it's become whatever. Then you need that other shiny thing. That's how we keep buying and destroying the planet. That's another thing. But so if you and especially when it comes to art, the limited availability or whatever, the exclusivity plays a key role. A piece of painting by a certain person has immense amounts of value because it's that one particular person who made it. It's not the aesthetic or visual quality. It's all the other subjective parameters. Now, if you're saying that there's a button that can generate art in any style, infinite amounts of art, it loses meaning, right? I think the word is meaning. So we're looking for meaning. You look forward to a Nolan because Nolan's not making one movie every day. Then you wouldn't care about Nolan. He's making that one amazing movie every X years, and you're really looking forward. If you have a Nolan button that keeps on generating, you wouldn't want.
I know what you're saying.
I think maybe, again, a thought experiment, just a wild guess, maybe people will start preferring imperfect things that are human made. Maybe that will become more valuable.
So if you think about Japan as a society, it's already living some of this already. So what happens is there is trauma response and it causes fight, flight, fawn, like different kind of possibilities, and it creates certain behaviors in a human. But a society can also go through a post-traumatic response. So post the bombings, Japan has become fairly weird. And I'm saying that word weird because from a human comparative lens, it may not be weird from their own vantage point, but like we could be looking weird right now to people who are listening in because we have a perspective.
I think definitely.
Can't help it. But the thing is, the Japanese found this interesting thing about like finding beauty on such weird things, right? And we'll be like, why is that exciting? And like like OCD is a trauma response, and most people don't understand that. Like we're in this obsession about pixelation and all of that, and it sounds morbid to say, oh shit, all the achievements are OCD driven and which is coming out of trauma, which is again a dark version of how humans achieve anything in life. Is like kind of playing out. So I think what you're saying is finding random things weird. I mean, this is something unexplored. I'm going to enjoy this and so on and so forth. Is exciting. I'm going to switch back to a different version of topic. Maybe we'll speak for a few minutes and then maybe go off camera and just have chat with the team. Because there were all these questions are about, oh, Zerodha mein tum kaun sa protocol use karte ho, that is like boring to ask you those questions. So we'll skip all
That's
that.
really important in the face of planetary collapse. The important stuff.
How do you motivate your team? So, let's say you were you were made the CTO of India. And assume that you are not existential. Just assume. And you are a very positive person and look forward to life and you want to save humanity type Marvel feelings you have. What are the three decisions you will take?
Firstly, I refuse to answer that because you're saying that I'm a whole different person.
Mm-hmm.
My lived experience of, let's say, almost 4 decades is completely different. My outlook, my knowledge, everything is different. I'm a whole different person. I may as well be, I don't know, Tom Cruise. What would I do? I don't know. I can say anything. It's it's an absurd premise.
Fair enough.
I've always found those questions to be absurd.
Let's say you are who you are. And
Then I would definitely not want such a position. Yeah.
But is it because it's difficult? Is it because it's pointless? Is it because you don't think you can add value? Why would you say that?
So, managing a tech team of, let's say, 30 people with very clear goals, I mean, finance and whatever, that is not the same as running technology for an entire civilization. So it's just that it's way beyond me. I can't even comprehend it. And it's so incomprehensible that I wouldn't even dare to think or daydream. It's just, I can't think.
You talked about this 30 plus people, so I'm going to ask you a specific question. You have a whole mutual fund product and let's say lending. How many people run that?
I mean, like 2 or 3 people.
Okay. And that includes, then there will be some product people and some design people and all of that, or that's all included 2, 3?
That's all included.
Okay.
But of course we have, there are, that's technology, product, UX, UI, etc. But there are people who do customer support, etc., customer support teams. That's not included. But the entire product tech team is for mutual funds. The entire piece is like 3 people.
Okay. So let's talk about the complexity that 30 people are running right now at Zerodha. Can you talk about the stack? What's being managed by these 30 people?
So, firstly, I want to add some clarity here. It's not that 30 people can manage this. It could have been 10 people, it could have been 50 people, could have been 100 people. Over a decade, it has just evolved to be 30 people. So 30 is not really a magic number. Could have been anything. It just happened to be 30.
It wouldn't be 1,000 though, right?
No, it would never be 1,000.
Okay.
It would
Can
never
you talk
be.
about the complexity of what that is?
So, I mean, stockbroking is an extremely complex business. Technology is complex. The risks are infinite. You could end up losing more money, more capital than the business has. That's the nature of complex financial instruments. Sub-millisecond latency, all of those, massive concurrency. So there is just one layer of problems from an end user product perspective. So we have to manage all of that. And then there's this whole invisible world of, we call it EOD in the industry, end of the day. Invisible world of countless complex processes that happen once the markets close. We start getting massive data dumps from depositories, exchanges, clearing corps, etc. And you have to take all of this crunch, figure out the right accounts, credit everyone's account, etc., etc., etc. So that's the entire back office process. So, this is just the product angle. But then, so Zerodha has 1,000 people. We have a really large support team. People call up asking about their money, so we have to pick up the phone and answer. We have legal, we have compliance, we have KYC. We have to have all of that. So to run an organization with 1,000 people, you need a lot of people systems, CRMs, intranet, etc., etc. We manage all of those within the tech team. We self-host open source software, our employee portal, our support ticketing system, absolutely everything is in-house and self-hosted software. So it's the same set of 30 people who run the front-facing technology, back-end technology, the people technology, organizational technology, compliance technology, risk, everything. But I'd like to say again that this has been an evolution. We've built everything from the absolute basics, and we had the luxury of time. We were not in a rush to do anything in 2 or 3 years. So over a decade, it's just happened to be.
Fair enough. What is the...
Well, that's the worst possible horn any vehicle could have.
Yeah. It makes you feel important. I sometimes feel that people honk because they feel so important. Because you go to so many societies and they're like have much more worse traffic and nobody's honking. It's almost disorienting for a bit. And I don't know why people do that. I think I notice a very specific behavior and I'm sitting next to like some cabs or even sitting with some friends. Like I sometimes saw somebody honking at a bumper and nobody's there. Like he just honked out of instinct. Like मैं थोड़ा honk कर देता हूँ. And I've known that EVs are now launching noise in the car. I don't know if you know about this thing.
Yeah.
So that because pedestrians have not figured out to know that the car is coming unless there's a noise. So we are putting artificial noise in EVs. So we are special. I'm going to ask the last couple of questions. We'll end on a positive note. What should we do to make some positive experiences now? Get some ideas. Do you do anything positive in life?
Everything I do is positive. I'm a realist. It's very hard to, once you see the evidence, it's very hard to ignore the evidence and sell yourself false optimism. If the planet is facing an impending catastrophe, it's not something that you can unsee. That whole willful ignorance thing, I don't know how it works. But like I said earlier, to be human is to do positive things despite knowing that it might not even make a difference. So everything I do, I guess, is positive. All my hobby projects, software projects, all my non-software hobby projects, the work that we do at our foundations, the work we do at Zerodha, everything, the stuff I do in personal life.
Do you do something what is classically defined as fun?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, good.
I mean, I was listening to Beyonce. Just like what everybody else does.
I'm just pulling your leg. I can tell you one thing that I've known Nitin for now close to 4-5 plus years, and he's become a lot more like you over a period of time. So I don't want to call it like he's become more pessimistic, become more real. So now when I meet him, it's again dark conversations. I used to have really nice conversations before. Okay, last question. If we had to go back in time 50 years, not too behind, and what are the few things that, and let's say you are now having the power to tweak things, what are the few things you would have tweaked so that the humanity has, we all love humans. I'm assuming that we are still not doomers that hate humans, they should die. We're not that, we're not Thanos yet, right? So let's assume that we are positive. So what would you tweak? Assume you have the power to tweaking everything.
It's again, I mean, even this concept of tweaking history, given that billions of events shape, random events shape everything. That one tiny event that you that you make 50 years ago could completely, entirely change the world. Barring all of those paradoxes, one thing that seems obvious would be to have a, when globalization, etc., was starting, the world economy was being defined, this whole thing about GDP, production, consumption, maybe that should have been looked at differently, so we extract from nature infinitely. Where do we pay the price? You sell me something, I pay you. There's that happening, right? I can go to any shop, buy whatever I want. You're paying a price that factors into infinite complexities in production. But when people extract stuff from nature, minerals, flora, fauna, trees, whatever, right? Nobody's paying the cost, and that's why we've ended up here, right? We've extracted unlimited oil, unlimited water. Nobody's slid coins into the Earth's piggy bank in a very figurative sense. So we should have had a different perspective of growth, progress, and economy in the technological era, maybe 50, 60 years ago, that also took into consideration the natural wealth. I think that would have been a very positive thing in general. Might have even curtailed the incessant consumerism, maybe the global economies would have been much more sustainable and whatnot. So from a very naive perspective, that seems obvious. Our idea of progress and development and growth should have been redefined to include the planet and the cost that we're supposed to pay for what we take.
It's so funny you're saying that. I always talk about this status-driven society and wealth-driven societies, and one day it occurred to me, the only way to become a sustainable species is to be status-driven and not wealth-driven. Because wealth-driven kind of creates this consumption machinery and wealth and all of that. A status-driven society is self-contained in some ways. It's very mammalian and biologically relevant. I don't think any species is wealth-driven. Every species is status-driven and managed to survive and coexist with the constitution of environment. But I think trying to become wealth-driven is an interesting thing. So on that note, two fintech people talking about wealth being a bad thing, but that's what it is. Thank you, Kay. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Awesome.